I found out my wife was pregnant with my brother's child on the same night my parents toasted to family loyalty at my dinner table. The room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap candles, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking even though I kept them flat on the wood like I could pin the truth down and keep it from moving. I remember thinking that if I stood up too fast, something inside me would tear for good. So I stayed still and let the words echo in my head until they stopped sounding real. I was never the son they bragged about. Not the disappointment either. I was the one who existed quietly in the background, useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. When I left home at 19 with a duffel bag and a borrowed car, no one tried to stop me. My younger brother Tyler stayed behind, shining and confident, already acting like the world owed him something. My parents watched him like he was proof they had done something right, and they watched me like I was a problem that had solved itself by leaving. Years passed without calls, without holidays, without questions about whether I was alive or dead. I built my life in silence. I worked. I paid my debts. I learned how to sleep without expecting anyone to check on me. By the time I met Emily, I thought I had finally earned a place where I mattered. Emily didn't demand anything from me. She listened. She stayed calm when I worked late. She said she admired how steady I was. That word stuck with me. Steady. We married after 2 years, small ceremony, no drama. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen. When my parents suddenly reached out again, it felt strange but hopeful. They said they missed me. They said time changes people. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like, forgiving without reopening old wounds. I invited them over. I invited Tyler too. That decision would hollow me out in ways I didn't understand yet. Tyler walked into my house like it already belonged to him. He laughed loud, touched Emily's arm when he spoke, acted like the same golden boy I remembered. Emily laughed at his jokes a second too long. I noticed. I ignored it. I didn't want to be the man who saw threats everywhere. When Emily told me she was pregnant, I cried in the car afterward, alone, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I had never wanted anything the way I wanted that child. I thought this was the moment my life finally made sense. Then things shifted. Emily started keeping her phone face down. Tyler stopped calling ahead before showing up. He talked to her belly when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his voice low and familiar. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was imagining things. One night, I couldn't sleep. Emily was breathing evenly beside me, her phone buzzing softly on the nightstand. I didn't plan it. I just picked it up. I read everything. There was a message that froze me in place, a single sentence that erased every excuse I had been clinging to. He thinks it's his. We'll tell him after the baby comes. I sat there until morning, watching the sky lighten, listening to my heart beat like it was trying to escape. By the time Emily woke up, I had already decided not to scream, not to beg, not to break. I looked at her and realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was a plan. And I understood something else too, something colder and heavier than anger. They had always known exactly who I was to them, and they were about to prove it again. I didn't confront Emily right away. That surprised even me. I went to work the next morning like nothing had changed, nodded through meetings, answered emails, signed off on budgets, all while replaying that sentence in my head until it lost shape and became something sharp and constant. I realized that yelling would give them relief. Silence would make them nervous. I chose silence. When I came home that evening, my parents were already there. My mother was rearranging things in the kitchen like she had always lived there. My father sat at the table, arms crossed, watching me the way he used to when I was a kid and had disappointed him without knowing how. Tyler leaned against the counter, relaxed, smiling, completely at ease in my space. Emily stood between them, one hand on her stomach, the other resting just a little too naturally on Tyler's wrist. They talked about the baby like it was a group project. Names, schools, neighborhoods. I listened and felt something detach inside me, like a cable snapping quietly under tension. No one asked what I thought. No one noticed how still I was. That night, after everyone left, I finally spoke. I asked Emily one question. Just one. I asked her how long it had been going on. She tried to lie. I could tell by how quickly she answered, how practiced her voice sounded. When I didn't respond, she started crying. Real tears. She said it wasn't supposed to happen. She said Tyler understood her in ways I didn't. She said I worked too much. She said a lot of things that sounded rehearsed and hollow. When I told her I knew the baby wasn't mine, she stopped crying instantly. The switch was so fast it scared me. She looked at me like I was an obstacle she hadn't expected to move on its own. She said we could still make it work. She said the baby needed stability. She said we could figure out the details later. That was the moment I understood she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for compliance. The next day, my parents called me in together. They spoke slowly, carefully, like they were handling something fragile. They said Emily was young. They said Tyler had made a mistake, but meant no harm. They said what mattered now was the child. They said family sticks together. I asked my father if he would have said the same thing if it were me who had done this to Tyler. He didn't answer. My mother changed the subject. Within a week, Emily moved out. Within 2, she filed for divorce. The paperwork painted me as distant, controlling, emotionally unavailable. Tyler moved in with her. My parents posted smiling photos online, talking about fresh starts and blessings. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I let them talk. I let the story settle the way they wanted it to. Inside, something hardened. Not anger. Focus. The divorce drained me. Money disappeared faster than I could process it. Friends stopped calling. Coworkers looked at me differently, like they had already heard the version of me that made sense to them. When it was over, I was left with a house that felt too big and too quiet. I cut contact completely. No calls. No messages. No holidays. I worked until exhaustion replaced memory. Months blurred together. Then years. I didn't notice the change at first. Just that my name started carrying weight in meetings. That people listened longer. That opportunities stopped being theoretical and started being real. Promotions came. Then offers. Then numbers that made my old losses feel small. The night I posted about my new position, I didn't think about them. I thought about how far I had come alone. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something close to anticipation. I let the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. Each time it buzzed across the table, I felt that old reflex in my chest, the one trained since childhood to respond, to explain, to fix. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. That evening, she left a voicemail. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered, strained in a way that didn't fit the confident woman who used to correct my posture at the dinner table. She said my name the way she used to when she wanted something. She said she was proud of me. She said the family was going through a rough patch. She didn't say sorry. She never did. The next day, she showed up at my office. I watched her through the glass walls as she argued with the receptionist, her hands moving fast, her mouth tightening with frustration. People were staring. I felt a calm settle over me, cold and steady. When I finally stepped out, she turned like she'd been waiting for a cue. She hugged me without asking. I stood there and let it happen, aware of how stiff I felt in her arms. She pulled back and looked at me like she was measuring something, checking if I still fit the version of me she had in her head. We went to a cafe nearby. She talked the entire time. Tyler had lost his job. Emily was on bed rest. Bills were piling up. The baby needed things. She said it was temporary. She said family helps family. I listened and nodded, saying nothing. When she finished, she looked relieved, like the hard part was over. Like my role was obvious. I told her I needed time. She didn't like that. Her mouth tightened again. She reminded me of everything they had done for me growing up. She reminded me that holding on to the past was unhealthy. She said I was being dramatic. I paid for the coffee and left her sitting there. That night, Tyler texted me. Just one message. He said we should talk like men. He said things had gotten complicated. He said he never meant to hurt me. Reading his words felt like pressing on a bruise to see how much it still hurt. It hurt plenty. I agreed to meet him. We sat across from each other in a bar I used to go to after work. He looked tired, thinner, less polished than I remembered. He smiled like he always had, like charm was something he could turn on automatically. He talked about bad luck, about stress, about how Emily was fragile and needed support. He said the baby had changed everything. He said I was strong, that I'd always been strong, and that's why he knew I'd understand. I asked him if he understood what he had taken from me. He laughed, just a little, like I'd said something naive. He told me life wasn't fair. He told me I needed to stop living in the past. He told me I should be grateful things worked out for him, because that meant the child would be okay. That was the moment something shifted again. I saw him clearly, without the filter of shared blood or old habits. He wasn't sorry. He was afraid. Afraid of losing comfort. Afraid of losing access. When I stood up to leave, He grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. He told me not to make things harder than they needed to be. He told me the family was watching how I handled this. I pulled my arm free and told him I hoped everything worked out. Over the next week, the messages multiplied. My parents, Tyler, even Emily, suddenly polite, suddenly understanding. They all circled closer, their words softer, their tone urgent. I didn't respond. I started documenting everything instead. Dates, times, messages, voicemails. One night, I opened a folder on my laptop and realized I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was preparing. And for the first time since the night I read that message on Emily's phone, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. I started sleeping better once I stopped pretending this was about forgiveness. There's a strange peace that comes with clarity, even when the truth is ugly. I wasn't deciding whether to help them. I was deciding how much access they would ever have to me again. Emily was the next to show up uninvited. She waited outside my house one evening, sitting in her car with the engine running, like she didn't trust herself to turn it off. I watched from the window until she noticed me and stepped out, one hand braced against her lower back, the other resting on her stomach. She looked smaller than I remembered. That didn't soften anything. She spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded reasonable. She said she knew she had hurt me. She said the situation had gotten out of control. She said she never meant for it to happen this way. She said the baby deserved stability. She said my parents were worried. She said Tyler was under a lot of pressure. She didn't say she was sorry. When I told her I wasn't going to give them money, her expression changed. The softness drained out of her face like it had that night in the bedroom. She told me I was being cruel. She told me courts don't like men who abandon pregnant women. She told me I should think carefully about how this might look. I told her to leave. 2 days later, I was served papers. She was asking for more support, citing my recent promotion and increased income. Reading the document felt unreal, like watching someone else's life from a distance. There it was in black and white, a story where I was the villain again, rewritten with new numbers and the same old lies. This time, I didn't panic. I called a lawyer. He listened without interrupting, flipping through the messages I'd printed, the screenshots, the timeline I'd built piece by piece. When he finally looked up, his expression was neutral but interested. He told me the first mistake people make is assuming the truth will automatically matter. The second mistake is waiting too long to prepare. I didn't make either mistake. I reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, co-workers, a cousin who used to watch how my parents treated me and never said anything out loud. I didn't beg. I didn't dramatize. I told them what happened and asked if they were willing to tell the truth if asked. Most of them said yes. As the court date approached, the pressure increased. My parents left messages alternating between anger and guilt. Tyler sent texts that swung from apology to threat in the span of minutes. Emily's tone hardened completely. She told me this wouldn't end well for me. She told me I was making a mistake. I stopped responding altogether. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my living room. Lights off, city noise humming faintly through the windows. I thought about the version of myself who had signed the divorce papers just to make it end. I thought about how tired he had been, how broken. I wasn't that man anymore. When I walked into the courthouse the next morning, I saw them all sitting together. Emily looked pale. My mother avoided my eyes. Tyler stared straight at me, his jaw tight, his foot tapping like he couldn't stay still. I took my seat and felt something unexpected settle over me. Not fear, not anger, control. As the judge called the case and Emily's attorney stood to speak, I knew something they didn't. They were about to realize that the story they'd been telling for years no longer belonged to them. Emily started with her rehearsed speech, each word carefully measured to make me look callous, cold, a man incapable of empathy. She painted herself as fragile, as the one holding the household together, as a victim of my indifference. Tyler sat next to her, his hands folded neatly, but his eyes darted toward me constantly, searching for a reaction. My parents watched from the back row, heads tilted, trying to look impartial, but I could see the calculation behind their eyes. They thought their loyalty, their theatrics, would still protect them. When my lawyer stood, he didn't speak about feelings. He presented facts, dates, messages, timelines. Screenshots of Emily planning with Tyler, voicemails proving my parents knew about the affair, records of financial manipulation, everything. Each piece was a strike against the carefully constructed image of me as a controlling, unfit husband. I watched as their confident posture wavered, ever so slightly, every time a new fact hit the table. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Emily's fingers twisted in her lap. My mother's lips pressed tight. I felt a calm in the chaos, a sharp clarity that had been absent for years. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was exposing them, showing exactly who they were. The people who had used me, lied about me, turned my life into a cautionary tale to cover their own failures. My parents had taught Tyler he was golden. They had trained Emily to manipulate, and I had been the perfect scapegoat. The hearing dragged on, hours filled with testimonies and objections. Witnesses I had contacted spoke with restraint but clarity, recounting every detail they had observed. One cousin described years of subtle favoritism, the way my parents had praised Tyler for minor achievements while ignoring or criticizing mine. An old coworker recounted how Emily had bragged about her plan to ensure I would never have full custody or authority over the child she carried. Each testimony tightened the noose of truth around the lies they had spun so effortlessly for so long. I could feel the tension in the courtroom shift. The smugness, the expectation that I would crumble under the accusations and the court's process, was cracking. Tyler's jaw twitched. Emily's cheeks flushed. My parents exchanged glances that betrayed panic. For the first time, their version of reality was vulnerable. For the first time, they were facing the unfiltered consequences of their actions. Then came the break for lunch. I stayed in the courtroom, staring at the papers, the evidence, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the stillness. My parents left, whispering heatedly to each other. Tyler stepped out briefly and returned with a forced smile, pretending to regain control. Emily lingered in her seat, checking her phone obsessively, eyes flicking to me every few seconds. I felt the old pull of anger, but it was different now. Not raw, not blinding. It was deliberate, cold, focused. I was no longer a victim. I was a force they had underestimated. When the session resumed, the judge called my lawyer forward. The closing arguments were precise, cutting, dismantling every claim that Emily or my family had made against me. The judge leaned forward, absorbing the evidence, the witness statements, the documented timelines. I noticed the shift in posture, the nods that weren't overt, the subtle acknowledgement that the weight of truth was undeniable. By the time the judge adjourned for a final decision, the courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. Tyler avoided my gaze completely. Emily's lips were pressed tight. My parents' fingers drummed nervously on the benches. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply breathed in the silence, letting it fill the space that had been stolen from me for so long. As I walked out into the corridor, I passed them. I looked at each of their faces, memorized the lines of tension, the shadows of fear, the sudden understanding that they had misjudged me. I realized in that moment that revenge wasn't about shouting, wasn't about confrontation. It was about reclaiming what they tried to take, my life, my peace, my control. I stepped outside, the sunlight harsh and bright against my eyes. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, an unshakable certainty that no one could touch me again. Not Emily, not Tyler, not my parents. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny, cold satisfaction bloomed. I knew this wasn't over. Not completely. But for the first time, I had the upper hand. And I wasn't about to let it go. The days after the court felt strange, almost unreal. I went back to my apartment, walked through the rooms that had once felt empty, and finally noticed how quiet it was without their voices, their manipulation, their demands. For years, my home had been a stage for everyone else's story, and now it was mine again. I could breathe without calculating my words, without imagining how they would twist everything I said into another weapon against me. Then came the first message from Tyler after the ruling. Just 3 words. We'll see. Short, loaded, threatening in the way only a man who has relied on luck and leverage can be. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I saved it anyway, added it to the growing folder labeled evidence of intent, and continued with my life. The adrenaline wasn't gone. It had just shifted into something quieter, something precise. It was waiting, calculating. Emily called that night. I ignored it. She left a long voicemail, voice shaky, pleading, apologizing, every line carefully constructed to poke at the guilt that she assumed I would feel. She reminded me of the baby, of family obligations, of morality. She said I was cruel and selfish. I replayed it once, then deleted it. None of her words held power anymore. I wasn't cruel. I was awake. I wasn't selfish. I was protecting what they had tried to destroy. My parents didn't stop either. My mother left notes under my door. My father showed up at my office once, insisting on a heart-to-heart. Both were begging now, subtly threatening, hinting at legal loopholes, hinting that the court didn't see everything, hinting that I might regret my decisions. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could watch them flounder. They had spent decades training me to react, to bend, to justify, to fail, and now I was still, and the calm was lethal. 2 nights later, Tyler came to my apartment unannounced. He tried to act casual, like we were still brothers, like nothing had changed. I let him step inside, let him smell the coffee, let him glance at the stack of folders on my desk, the folders full of texts, emails, voicemails, pictures, witness statements. I watched his confident facade crack in milliseconds. His eyes flicked to the evidence, then back to me, then back again, and I could see the panic beginning to edge in. He tried to negotiate first. Words soft, sentences careful, begging disguised as reasoning. "Look, man, it wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said. "We're just trying to make it work." I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I simply walked to the window, opened it, and let the night air fill the room. The silence was a wall. He shifted, uneasy. I turned slowly. "Tyler," I said, voice calm, even cold. "It's over. You're done." He laughed nervously. "You don't mean that." "I do." I could see the color drain from his face, the muscles in his jaw tighten. He realized this wasn't a bluff. He realized that every year of manipulation, every lie, every betrayal had been logged, saved, and now wielded silently, methodically. He stepped back, hands slightly raised like a man surrendering in slow motion. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I let him leave. As the door clicked shut, I finally allowed myself a small exhale. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was the recognition that control had shifted entirely, not over my life alone, but over the narrative they had tried to define for me. They were off balance, and I was steady. But just as the quiet settled, my phone buzzed. "Emily." Again. I didn't answer. I read the text. "You can't hide from us forever. We'll find a way. You'll pay." I set the phone down, stared at it for a long moment, and smiled. Not because I liked threats, but because I understood exactly what she meant. And I was ready. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But now I was the one with all the cards. And I wasn't playing fast or sloppy. I was going to make them wish they had never underestimated me. The next move came from a place I didn't expect, and that's what made it dangerous. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was quiet, calculated, and designed to look accidental. A week after Tyler showed up at my apartment, I got a call from HR. They said someone had filed a complaint. Anonymous. They couldn't share details yet, only that it involved allegations of hostile behavior and emotional intimidation in the workplace. Old words. Familiar words. The same ones Emily had used in the divorce papers. The same ones my parents had nodded along to like they were facts. I thanked them for letting me know and hung up. I didn't feel panic. I felt recognition. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to damage. To stain me just enough that even if nothing stuck, the doubt would. That had always been their real weapon. Not proof. Suggestion. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through everything again. Emails. Performance reviews. Messages from coworkers. Commendations. Projects delivered under pressure. Every interaction documented. Every timeline clean. I knew they were reaching for anything that might tilt the balance back in their favor. Emily texted again the next morning, pretending she didn't know about the complaint, pretending concern. She asked if I was okay. She said stress can make people act out of character. She said she hoped I was taking care of myself. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my lawyer. He listened. He paused. Then he told me something that locked everything into place. He said that once people realize they can't control the outcome, they start trying to control the damage. He said this was predictable. He also said that if we were smart, we wouldn't just defend. We would counter. That afternoon, I filed my own report. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Factual. Detailed. I outlined the pattern. The coordinated accusations. The timing. The harassment. The threats. I attached messages. Screenshots. Voicemails. I made it impossible to frame this as coincidence. Then I waited. 2 days later, Emily's lawyer called mine. The tone had changed. Less confidence. More urgency. They wanted to talk about a settlement. About reducing conflict. About moving forward amicably. I laughed when my lawyer told me. Tyler didn't take it as well. He showed up again, this time not at my apartment, but in the parking garage under my building. He stepped out from behind a concrete pillar like he'd rehearsed it, blocking my path as I walked toward my car. His face was tight, eyes bloodshot, the charm completely gone. He said I was ruining everything. He said I was obsessed. He said I needed to let go. His voice shook when he said my name. And for the first time in our lives, I saw fear without arrogance hiding behind it. I told him to move. He didn't. He stepped closer, too close, and hissed that he could still make my life difficult. That people believed him. That blood mattered. That I would always be the problem child, the one no one really trusted. I pulled out my phone and held it up. He froze. I told him calmly that the audio recording had already been backed up to multiple locations. That his texts were already in legal hands. That the harassment report was no longer theoretical. That the next time he approached me, it wouldn't be a conversation. He stared at me like I had just spoken a language he didn't understand. Then he backed away, slow and stiff, like a man stepping away from a ledge he hadn't realized he was standing on. That night, my parents sent one final message together. It was long. It was full of disappointment, shame, moral lectures. They said I had gone too far. They said I was tearing the family apart. They said one day I would regret choosing pride over blood. I read it once. Then I blocked all of them. No announcements. No warnings. Just silence. The silence hurt them more than anything else ever had. I felt it in the days that followed, in the way the messages stopped, in the way the pressure evaporated, in the way my life started to feel solid again. Work stabilized. HR closed the inquiry quietly. No findings. No marks. No shadows left behind. But I knew better than to believe it was finished. People like them don't accept loss. They wait for exhaustion, for distraction, for weakness. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't waiting for peace. I was waiting for the moment they made one last mistake. And I knew they would. The mistake came disguised as desperation, and it arrived sooner than I expected. It started with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. Then another. Then a voicemail. It wasn't Emily. It wasn't Tyler. It was a woman's voice, older, shaky, trying too hard to sound calm. She said her name was Linda. She said she worked at the daycare Emily had enrolled the baby in. She said there were questions about payments and documentation. She said she needed to speak to me as soon as possible. I knew immediately what they were trying to do. They were reaching outward now, dragging strangers into their mess, hoping confusion would do what intimidation no longer could, hoping I would panic and rush to clean up something that wasn't mine. I didn't call back. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. An hour later, another message came in. This one from Emily. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said the daycare thought I was still financially responsible. She said it would be easier if I just confirmed things so there wouldn't be complications. She said she didn't want things to get messy. Messy. The word almost made me laugh. That evening, Tyler tried again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a confession wrapped in self-pity. He said he was drowning. He said my parents were leaning on him. He said Emily was impossible to live with. He said the baby cried constantly and the bills never stopped. He said he hadn't slept in weeks. He asked me if I remembered when we were kids, when I used to cover for him, when I used to take the blame. That was the moment I understood the shape of his fear. They weren't just running out of money. They were running out of stories. I told him I remembered a lot of things from childhood, mostly what it felt like to be invisible. Then I hung up. The next escalation crossed a line they couldn't uncross. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with my company's legal department. This time it wasn't HR. This time it was serious. Someone had contacted them directly, claiming I had withheld financial support from a dependent child and that my conduct could expose the company to reputational risk. They didn't accuse me. They asked questions. Careful ones. I answered every single one. I provided court documents. I provided rulings. I provided timelines. I provided proof that the child was not mine, had never been mine, and that all legal obligations had been terminated. I showed them the messages, the pressure, the coordinated attempts to involve third parties. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted completely. What they saw wasn't a liability. It was harassment. That afternoon, my lawyer filed something new. Not a defense. An action. A formal cease and desist. Against Emily. Against Tyler. Against my parents. For harassment, defamation, and malicious interference with employment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise, clinical, and devastating. The notices went out the same day. Emily called screaming. Tyler texted in fragments, half sentences full of panic. My parents left voicemails alternating between outrage and disbelief, insisting this had gone too far, insisting I was humiliating them. They didn't understand yet. This wasn't humiliation. This was containment. Within 48 hours, the noise stopped. Completely. No calls. No messages. No surprise appearances. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and cut the power. I went home that night and stood in my living room, listening to the quiet. Not the heavy quiet from before. This one was clean. Intentional. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't include them at all. That's when I saw the email. It was from an unfamiliar address. No name. No greeting. Just one sentence. You should check what your parents have been telling people about you. And attached to it was a video file. I didn't open it right away. I sat down. I stared at the screen. I felt that old tension coil in my chest. Not fear, but readiness. Because whatever was in that file, I knew one thing for sure. They had just made the mistake I'd been waiting for. I didn't breathe when I clicked the file. I didn't brace. I just watched. The video was shot from a distance, shaky at first, like someone was hiding, recording without being noticed. Then it became clear what I was seeing. My parents, Emily, and Tyler, gathered at a financial advisor's office, whispering, pointing at charts, nodding at numbers, laughing quietly. The camera caught them discussing ways to manipulate assets, to apply pressure, to make me appear irresponsible so they could claim anything they wanted. They were plotting, not just for money, but for reputation, for leverage, for the illusion that I had always been the problem. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, mind running fast but calm. I recognized the old patterns immediately. Every smirk, every glance, every whisper was exactly the same behavior that had driven me out of my childhood home. The same behavior that had cost me my marriage, my dignity, and years of peace. And now, for the first time, I had proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell my lawyer immediately. I let it sit. I let the image of them plotting, whispering, conspiring, sink into my mind. I let the tension build, let the rage simmer under control. It was intoxicating, but it was deliberate. They had underestimated me for years. They had assumed I would react emotionally, that I would beg, that I would try to reason with them like I always had. But now I was different. I was not the scared kid they had pushed out of the house. I was not the man they had tried to destroy with lies. I spent the next 24 hours gathering everything I had on them. Files, messages, financial statements, recordings. Every piece of evidence that could turn this from a threat into a weapon. I made copies, encrypted backups, and prepared for the moment I would confront them not with words, but with facts. Facts that could not be ignored. Facts that would leave no room for manipulation or charm. Facts that would make them realize, finally, that I was untouchable. Then, just as the sun was setting, Tyler showed up at my building again. Not at the door. Not in my apartment. Outside. Watching. Waiting. His car idling in the lot, headlights dimmed. I didn't answer. I didn't even look outside. I let him sit there, stewing, guessing, panicking. 2 hours later, Emily's car appeared. Parked on the street, lights off, engine quiet. I could see her moving inside, probably checking her phone, checking me, checking Tyler. I stayed silent. I stayed inside. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. By midnight, they were gone. But I knew the truth. They had realized their plan had been discovered. They had felt the shift. They were scrambling, panicking, and I was calm. I finally opened my phone and sent one message. Simple. Precise. Stop. Or this ends badly for all of you. I've got everything. You know exactly what I'm capable of now. Consider this your last warning. No reply. Not from any of them. And I smiled because I knew, deep down, that they understood. For the first time in their lives, they had lost control. And once they lost control, they couldn't get it back, not over me. I sat back and realized that this wasn't just revenge. This wasn't just justice. This was power. Cold, calculated, undeniable power. And for the first time, I felt completely untouchable. Because now, I held everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation. And I would decide when, where, and how it would end. They folded faster than I expected. Not publicly. Not with apologies. People like them never do that. They folded in silence, behind closed doors, the way cowards always retreat when the lights are about to turn on. 2 days after my message, the lawsuit was withdrawn. No explanation. No calls. Just a sterile court notification that the claim was being voluntarily dismissed. I read it twice, then once more, just to be sure it was real. It was. But I wasn't done. Because justice isn't just about stopping the knife. It's about making sure the hand never comes back. I met with my attorney that same afternoon. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace. I handed him everything. The video, the recordings, the financial trail, the timeline that showed intent, coordination, and deception. He went quiet as he scrolled. When he looked up, his face wasn't impressed. It was alarmed. "This isn't defense," he said. "This is offense." I nodded. "Good. We didn't rush. We moved clean. Precise. A civil filing first. Targeted. Narrow. No drama. No exaggeration. Just facts stacked so tight they couldn't slip through. Then a quiet notice sent to the financial institutions involved. Compliance departments don't care about family. They care about risk. Accounts were frozen within 48 hours. Then came the calls. My father left 3 voicemails in one night. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. My mother texted long paragraphs that said nothing except panic wrapped in guilt. Tyler didn't call at all. He never did when Charm stopped working. Emily showed up. She stood outside my building again, this time in daylight, like that made it respectable. I watched her from the window for a long time before going down. She looked older. Tired. Not broken. Just exposed. She started talking the second she saw me. About misunderstandings. About stress. About how things got out of hand. I let her finish. I always let people finish when they're digging their own graves. When she stopped, I said exactly one sentence. "You tried to erase me and live off what I built." Her face collapsed. Not into remorse. Into fear. "I didn't destroy you," I continued. "You just forgot I was watching." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. That was the moment she understood this wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. I turned and walked away. She didn't follow. The fallout wasn't loud. It was surgical. My parents sold their house 6 months later. Quietly. Tyler moved out of state. Emily disappeared from every shared circle we once had. No statements. No public blame. Just absence. People asked me if I felt satisfied. I didn't. Satisfaction is loud. It needs witnesses. This didn't. What I felt was alignment. Like something that had been crooked in my spine my whole life finally snapped straight. I didn't win because they lost money. I won because they lost access. Access to my time. My energy. My guilt. My silence. I wasn't the convenient son anymore. I wasn't the fallback husband. I wasn't the wallet with a conscience. I was the consequence they never thought they'd face. Years ago, they betrayed me when I had nothing. They came back when I became valuable. And now they live with the one thing they can never recover. The certainty that I see them clearly. And I will never again mistake blood for loyalty or history for obligation. This is where it ends. Not with revenge. With distance. With clarity. With a life they will never touch again.